Week 2 of Trump 2 brings a bit of chaos to Ohio. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. I'm Mike Thompson. The disruptive second term of the Trump administration continues to have many in Ohio scrambling. Monday evening brought a bombshell memo that every federal loan and grant program was frozen. It appeared to temporarily cut off funding for states, universities, private companies, nonprofit organizations. Trump's budget office said it was to eliminate what it called woke practices. Organizations and state officials scrambled to learn what it meant and to prepare for the consequences. Then, 24 hours later, a judge blocked the memo. And a few hours after that, the Trump administration rescinded the memo, but indicates its intent remains. Laura Bischoff, more than 1/3 of state revenues come from the federal government. My guess is there was some scrambling going on Tuesday morning at the State House.
I think there was scrambling all across the state. You know, a lot of nonprofits, I think school lunches were on the line, scientific research loans and grants to Intel. It really kind of put into stark relief how reliant we are on the federal government for these funds. And I think that the Trump administration with this freeze, unfreeze stuff, I think what they're doing is kind of flexing its muscle and trying to deliver on a promise to cut back on waste, fraud, and abuse. This was more of a sledgehammer approach than a surgical approach.
So the crisis, if you want to call it that, the scramble has passed, Julie. Now, but the budget comes out, the governor's budget comes out next week. Are they doing contingency plans for more federal cuts down the road?
I don't think we know that yet, but I think that they would be wise to maybe dial that back a little bit. But, you know, I think that it was a flexing of the muscle and the policy idea, but we saw, much as in the first Trump term, a really speeded up lesson in American government democracy. Everybody's looking around going, what? The federal government funds HIV research in Africa? What? The federal government funds, you know, this great big business development we were looking forward to, and Jobs Ohio was scrambling, and you know, everyone is wondering. So I think that states really don't know what to make of it. They were very circumspect when we asked them what they had to say about it.
Bob, cutting government spending is going to be a priority of the Trump administration,
Sure.
But by going so aggressively, really unrealistically aggressively, does that hurt their case down the road?
Well, I think what Laura said is true. They're sending a warning here. I think what everybody has to, state and local governments, nonprofits, everybody that receives federal funds needs to take this warning and not assume that you're going to get what you always got. I mean, this is the way the federal government works. Everybody always assumes we keep getting what we've been getting. It may not be that way. And you talk about contingency plans for the state. Yeah, they better have a contingency plan because there's no guarantee they're going to get the same level of funding.
Morgan, federal spending has gone from $4 trillion to $7 trillion just in the past 8 years. That's a 75% increase. COVID had a lot to do with that. Aging population needing more Medicare dollars has a lot to do with that. But that's a big jump. The spending has to slow and be cut at some point, right?
Sure, and that's something that we should address. But in order to do that, you have to actually look at what is the cause of the problem. And one of the largest drivers of federal spending is actually healthcare costs. So you're not going to solve that by just cutting off people's access to healthcare who are relying on Medicaid. You're going to do that by going after a lot of the large healthcare conglomerates that are gouging us as taxpayers and not really accountable for any of the things that they're charging us to access quality healthcare.
Now, Congress passed these laws. They passed the CHIPS Act. Let's take the Intel project, for example. That money's there. It's administered by the Commerce Department, but presumably, given the vagueness of the memo, that would have been cut off. Can the president do that unilaterally?
No, actually, there's a case, I think, from like 1974 in which Richard Nixon tried to do what's called impoundment and just say, we're not spending this money. Congress has control of the purse and where the money gets spent. So it is up for debate. If it's tried again, I think we'll see some court challenges.
And it's just interesting because Congress itself is being relatively docile about this whole thing. Trump has put so many people in there who are very supportive of him. Many of them pledged on the campaign trail they're going to support his agenda. And I think that they're looking at this going, well, how do we navigate if the president decides to take away the entire authority of the Congress?
Bob, this put Republicans in a tough spot because Democrats are up in arms right away,
Yeah.
no risk.
Yeah.
But Republicans can't say, wait, hold on.
Well,
this is a little abrupt.
It's going to depend on every member's own district. How is this going to affect their district? They don't know yet. I mean, they have no clue. If it's going to be a negative, you're going to see some Republicans probably fight back on it. You know, the problem we're going to get into here on the spending side is the fact that the president's also going ahead with doing away with taxes not only on tips, but also overtime and Social Security, which means even less money is going to be coming in. So, I mean, if he's going to do that, he's got to do something on the other side.
Well, and they're saying that the revenue that's coming in from these proposed tariffs is going to make up for any of the decrease in revenue that might happen if we get rid of the income tax, for example. And even experts that agree that tariffs are a good thing say that that's just not likely to be true. So, you know, I think what the main idea here is Trump, I agree, is trying to send a warning both to the recipients of federal funds, but then also to anyone who might challenge him, that he is consolidating executive power. He doesn't care what the Supreme Court's saying. He doesn't really care what Congress says. And it's a cover for making sure that his friends like Elon Musk get as much money as possible out of the government.
Well, I mean, we should say that it made clear that programs that were going to individuals, money that's going direct to your Social Security payment or your Medicare check were not supposed to be on the block. But then the question is all these other programs going through community block grants and things like that, where there are untold numbers of ways that these things impact people's real lives.
Yeah, that's one lesson is how much money from the federal government is out there in every walk of life.
You might not see it in, you know, basic research grants. There's no like tangible connection to that. But if your kid is in the lunch line and they're told like, sorry, school lunch subsidies are out.
It's
and
$5-10 today.
Yeah, that's really tangible.
Yeah. All right, our next topic, immigration officers are detaining people in Ohio suspected of being in the country illegally. The intensity of the effort and how many have been affected remains cloudy. Northeast Ohio media outlets report 20 people were arrested at a Cleveland Heights taco restaurant. There are reports of detentions here in Central Ohio, but no high-profile raids. Morgan Harper, it's hard to get a handle on what's happening because, I mean, ICE was detaining people throughout all the past 15, 20 years, but now it seems to be more intense.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's something that we need to be honest about, you know, regardless of what your party affiliation is that these types of raids and deportations have been happening for some time. And I think the other important point is most Americans, I think, do believe that if you have undocumented people in the country that have committed crimes, that have harmed other people, then there's probably not a place for them here. The issue, kind of like what we're saying, the blunt instrument, is that there is very little indication that that kind of nuance is really being prioritized in how the Trump administration might be approaching these deportations. And it's also causing a lot of general fear in the immigrant population. But again, I mean, I do think that this is a lot of these efforts on their part are trying to distract from some of the bigger power grabs and money grabs that are happening even in the early days of the Trump administration.
This is what Donald Trump promised, Bob,
Yep.
to go after the undocumented immigrants. Latest polls out today show that people generally support it, but it's just beginning. We're hearing some stories of kids being brought over, but their mom getting stuck behind with this moratorium.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, he campaigned on this a lot. It's around 58% of the population supports it. 97% of the people they've picked up so far were people that had detainers that from the Biden years that they never deported. So these are individuals that should have been out of here and they're not. So it's not like we're breaking new ground here. We're just getting rid of the people that we should have. And like Morgan said, I mean, these are people with serious crimes. And I know, you know, everybody's concerned about schools, hospitals. That hasn't happened. But if they need to go into a school, they're going to go into school because they have somebody who came here illegally with a serious crime. That individual shouldn't be in the school to begin with. So they're not going after kids. They're not going after, people like that. They are trying to find kids that have been lost in the system, that came over without parents, that somehow they got lost. They're trying to find those, but they're not trying to deport children.
The concern is, though, that you'll sweep up other folks as a part of this, the people who, are sort of, I don't want to say partially documented. They've come here, they've helped law enforcement solve a crime, so they get a document that keeps them here temporarily until their case can be heard.
That's the problem with sanctuary cities and states, in that instead of giving the one individual they want, they don't, and then ICE comes in, they find that individual, but then in the process, they have what they call the collaterals, that are just individuals that maybe don't have a criminal record, but they are here illegally. They get swept up. And that's the way it works.
Or lots of children. I mean, yeah, the humanity of all of this is not being prioritized in any way. And even if the individual they're looking for isn't in the school, the fact that this is going to have ripple effects across families is a real big concern, as you're saying, Mike, for even people that don't fit into that category of having committed a crime.
So, Julie, what are government agencies, local government agencies, municipalities, state government, schools, what are they doing to deal with this?
Well, I mean, I think obviously they're cooperating, they're trying to, but I do know that, some of the local governments have tried to re-emphasize their sanctuary status and to say, we're here to be a safe haven for people. That's going to be quite controversial. If you're, I've already seen pushback, for example, that the Franklin County Commissioners did this, and one of the commissioners is married to a congresswoman up in Akron who's taking some heat from that for Republicans. So, I think they're going to try to maintain the sanctuary protections that they did to try to at least slow it down, if not end it, but certainly to just maybe not be the blunt instrument and the fast pace.
Laura, Mike DeWine will be in a tough spot if they end temporary protected status for Haitian immigrants, and the ones in Springfield are told that they have to leave.
Yeah, Mike DeWine's got a long history with Haiti. His daughter, Becky DeWine, who died in 1993 in a car crash, the DeWines have helped fund and support a school that's named after their daughter. And so he's been to Haiti, 24 times probably. And when the whole cats and dogs nonsense happened at the debate, he was put in the position of defending, like, these are people who are here legally, and they left Haiti because of very extreme violence and hardship. And now there's a lot of businesses in Springfield that rely on these immigrants as workers.
Yeah. So, and if they do order, they ask the state's help to deport those folks. That's going to put him in a tough spot. Bob, getting to that business angle.
What?
A lot of businesses, use undocumented immigrants, construction industry,
they're
service
not supposed
industries.
to. Yeah,
I know,
they're not supposed to.
But that's going to have an effect. A lot of these folks have been here for decades, working for these companies. That will hurt the economy and hurt businesses.
Well, then, what we need to do, if that's going to be such a major problem, then we need Congress to change the law to allow people, if they've been here for 10 years illegally, but they're working steadily and contributing.
Does Donald Trump do that? Does he lead the fight to do that?
I said Congress needs to do that.
He tells Congress
the laws, Mike, not President Trump.
The same Congress that is afraid to step at all out of line. I mean, this is the reality of it, is this is just to placate the base. Donald Trump's not trying to solve immigration problems. I was just talking to someone today that's talking about a business in Central Ohio that is by far the majority of the workers undocumented immigrants. They were talked about this before, and they said, no, don't bother us. We won't be able to function as a business without undocumented immigrants. So
this wouldn't have been an issue if we hadn't had what happened over the last 4 years. That's what brought this to where we're at today. You can't let in
But wasn't
8
there a
million
deal on the table that Congress agreed to, but Donald Trump told
after they
Congress?
all had come in?
I know,
Mike,
but
why
they-
didn't they do that in January of 2021?
Better late than
why
never.
did he
There was a
wait
deal
until?
on the table.
Why did President Biden wait until he saw it was going to be a campaign issue on his re-election campaign?
all of that
So
might be
doesn't
true,
work.
but there was a deal on the table that would have solved this, and if we're about actually solving problems, if that's what this president's going to prioritize, then the ideas are already there. But that was not part of his initial moves in this executive
But
order.
they had control of Congress and the presidency for 2 years, and they did nothing.
All right.
2025, it's a new time.
Maybe this time we'll get it. We'll solve the problem. Anyway, there is a new proposal to end the death penalty in Ohio, but this time supporters have linked it to abortion rights. A measure proposed by a group of Republican and Democratic lawmakers would end capital punishment, and it would prohibit state funding for abortions and assisted suicide. Now, assisted suicide is illegal in Ohio, and law prohibits tax money from being used to perform abortions. But abortion opponents fear the new abortion rights amendment could undermine that funding ban. As for the death penalty, for all intents and purposes, Ohio does not have capital punishment right now. A lack of lethal injection drugs has put executions on hold for 7 years. And Mike DeWine recently told reporters there will be no executions while he's governor. Julie Carr Smythe, you alluded to this a couple of weeks ago. You said something was afoot. Does this effort have legs to end the death penalty in Ohio?
I think this is absolutely fascinating. So we have a conservative Republican in Gene Schmidt who says and admits, in 2002, I viciously attacked the people who were convicted of these murders, and I wanted them to be subjected to capital punishment. I've changed my mind. And we all have the ability to change our minds. Now you have Nikki Antonio, who runs the Democratic caucus in the Ohio Senate. She's for this bill as well. Now, it has in there that there would be a prohibition on state funding for anything related to abortion. What her point is that that's already part of state law. Same with the prohibition on assisted suicide. So what they've done is they've tried to make a policy statement that's consistent for state money should not end life. And the Democrats are admittedly taking a bit of a leap and a risk that they're putting this abortion thing out there. But she made the point that, well, every bill we introduce, can be gutted. And at the last minute change, she said, I've had to take my name off bills that I sponsored. So, they're giving it a try in a new way.
Well, this is the pro-life movement opposes abortion, of course.
Yeah.
Also opposes assisted suicide and opposes the death penalty.
Yeah.
So does this satisfy the pro-life movement?
I'm pro-life, and I was like Gene Schmidt. I used to think, the death penalty, we need that for bad things. But you know what? You can't be consistent if you're pro-life and have that. The other thing, which is just fact, is the way the capital punishment was done or not done because of all the delays, court challenges, all of that. It wasn't an effective deterrent in any way, shape, or form because most people never were executed. And if you were, it was maybe 30 or even later. I find this interesting that, Nikki Antonio's for it in the Senate, but then Allison Russo in the House is stating, I don't know about this. It'll be interesting to see what has greater weight with Democrats, capital punishment or abortion.
Well, Morgan, let's get to that. How do folks who are staunchly in favor of abortion rights greet this piece of legislation that does, at least symbolically place a restriction on abortion, even if it's already doing what's already happening now?
Yeah, this is kind of tricky. I mean, of course, I think most Democrats and probably, a lot of independents, and then we're starting to veer into the Republican part of the coalition, think that the death penalty should be done away with in Ohio. But having Democrats on record as supporting something that's against the access to abortion, reproductive rights, even if it's already in the law, I worry a little bit about how politically that might come back to bite us. So tread carefully, especially at the Ohio State House as a Democrat.
Well, the ACLU raised the issue that this might place restrictions on medication abortions. I'm not sure if that's the case or not. But getting to Mike DeWine, Governor DeWine has not signed off on an execution. The lack of drugs is the official reason, but it seems like he's more and more uncomfortable with this as well.
Yeah, he hinted that he's going to have more to say about that sometime early this year. He said that back in December to the press. If Ohio were to get rid of the death penalty, it would be a major shift. We've had the death penalty for 222 years.
It was on pause during the Supreme Court errors, but then they put it back in, yeah.
Still.
But we have to remember that this is under, Donald Trump has already said he is ordering something, an executive order that he will fine the drugs for the states. So that's going to put governors like Mike DeWine on the hook for, they're saying that this is a moratorium that relates to in access to the drugs. And he's going to reinstitute death penalty at the federal level, right?
Well, there's also a bill, I think Brian Stewart's going to reintroduce a bill to use nitrogen gas to carry out executions.
Gas
So there is a segment in the legislature that is pro-death penalty.
All right. For more than a year, lawmakers have toyed with the idea of making changes to the voter-approved law that legalized recreational marijuana. This time they may do it. A new proposal would increase the tax rate from 10% on sales to 15%. It would ban people from smoking marijuana in public, reduce the number of allowable homegrown plants from 12 down to 6, and limit the potency of cannabis products. Bob Clegg, this law's been in place for a year. I have not heard of any major issues. People are just enjoying their marijuana. There has not been a rush on ERs. Why change the law?
Because they can.
I know.
Are you surprised that they're going to do this?
I can see the tax rate changing. That's more
Well,
money.
you knew that was going to happen. Everybody knew that they were going to increase, government share on this. Yeah, the one problem we do have, though, Mike, in this first year that we've done it, we're not really competitive price-wise to like Michigan. They're still under us on, and that's a problem because people are just going to cross state lines to go there.
So increasing the taxes is going to make you less competitive, right?
Boom, you got it. I mean, from the beginning, how long have we been talking about this? From the beginning, Ohio has been dragged kicking and screaming into the marijuana world, whether it was medical or recreational. And, this is just part of it.
Ohio wasn't dragged. The lawmakers were dragged.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean,
the government of Ohio was dragged.
I think
Hey,
this-
I tried in 2015 with an issue on the ballot, and it went down. I tried.
I think this raises a question of respecting the will of the voters. This gutting the home grow from 12 to 6 plants. That was very specific proposal in the law that the voters said, yeah, I like that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, and this is something across the country. I think we're seeing this attempt to try to consolidate the cannabis industry and have some preference for larger companies that are going to be distributing it versus allowing folks who might have been formerly incarcerated or have more community level operations be able to have the independence and freedom, which I think is one of the values that Republicans in Ohio claim to care about. Sometimes, to do that. And the other thing is, if we're talking about sources of revenue and major problems in the state, I am much more concerned about the amount of money that's going through state gambling and all of the problems that could stem from that. I think it was like $300 million in 1 month spent on gambling in last year, November. And I'm not hearing the same up in arms
But
behavior
they're getting their cut on that too, though. So that's why they're not going to complain that
They
there's
should.
a lot of
Make it more. I mean,
they're,
it's a danger.
they're getting their cut on all kinds of gambling.
Any concern, Julie, that lowering the potency, increasing the cost, pushes people to the black market, to illegal sales?
Well, I'm sure that'll come up. I mean, it's a brand new proposal, but I think that that's always the risk. The risk of, like Bob says, going across the border and sort of beginning to gut the market that we've just begun to build here, is definitely a risk. I can understand that. I mean, one of the issues with the number of plants that I recall from the ballot campaign was that, wow, plants can get really big, and 12 is a lot, and 6 is plenty, and et cetera. And so they're like Bob says, they can do it, so they will.
More room for tomato plants. Well, anyway, are they trying to kill the industry, Bob, real quick?
Pardon?
The lawmakers trying to kill the pot industry?
Oh, they're just trying to get it way under control. I'll say that.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Morgan Harper, you're up first.
So this week marks the end of, at the federal level, Federal Trade Commissioner Lena Khan's tenure there. And one of her major pieces of legacy will be trying to ban non-competes across the country. That is up in the courts to decide if that's going to stick. But we have had legislators here in Ohio that have introduced their version of it, banning non-compete agreements, allowing workers to have more freedom to choose whatever job they want to be in.
All right, Bob.
Mike, it's never too early to talk about 2026 elections. And a poll just came out this week from a third-party entity and done by Emerson that showed Vivek Ramaswamy is pretty far ahead in the Republican primary. He had a little over 50%. I think the next one was Dave Yost at 19.
Does it hold?
We'll see.
All right, Julie.
Well, we're saying goodbye this week in the State House press corps to Lee Leonard, who was a long time State House reporter and then retired. But he was a really kind man to me from the moment I was a Lantern journalist showing up as a stringer in the election 1984 and onward. It was just a privilege to ultimately become his colleague and his friend, and we're going to miss him.
Laura.
I'll echo that. You know, he spent 36 years as a legislative reporter, which is an eternity, and he really represented the profession well. He was dogged, he was thorough, he was well respected. But what I'm hearing this week is just how he was like this guardian angel to all the rookies who came in, me included. So we'll miss him.
All right, I will echo those comments. Lee Leonard retired before this show first aired, so unfortunately he was not a regular panelist. He once appeared about 10 years ago to discuss his book about Governor Rhodes, but he was a loyal viewer of this program and always had a kind word about the show, and praise coming from Lee Leonard was high praise indeed. So peace to his family, friends, and colleagues. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the conversation on Facebook. Also watch us anytime on your time. Our website, wosu.org/COTR. Also on YouTube and the PBS video app. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.